Good morning. Wow. I got to run over here. My printer has decided to jam this morning. In the book of Ecclesiastes, chapter 7, I was adding just a little bit to my notes here, and then I went to print, and the printer in my office just said no. I don't think I've ever had that printer jam before, but it did today. All right, so we basically finished this section that goes as you know, and again, it depends on. Sometimes you'll see slightly different headings, divisions, and you'll notice that even when we're looking at the New King James there on the left versus the ESV. Its rendering and how they divide it there on the right. Sometimes there'll be slight difference, but the way we were looking at this section dealing with balance, and that's, the school of life. The balance is the section we're about to get into. But the school of life section, as one brother called it, goes down through, as he's got it divided down through, verse 13, and then 14 through 29 being that section that he calls balance. And I do like I like that division. And so we left off last week just, kind of concluding this section on the school of life, talking about how, verse 10, he says, don't fool yourself. It's easy to be fooled into thinking that the past was so much better, the good old days, and not to appreciate what we have in the moment, what we have right here in the present. And so don't be fooled, he says. It's easy for that to happen. And the past has a way of, it can kind of trick us. Our memory can kind of trick us. Sometimes we tend to remember the good things, but not the bad. And so we think, well, if I just go back to that. So he says, don't be fooled by that. And then 11 through 13, he says wisdom is better, and he's coming back. We hit this pretty quickly last week, but he's coming back to the truth that he states in chapter 1, verse 15. I say he comes back to that. In verse 13, he's coming back to that. Who can make straight what he has made crooked? In other words, again, some things, they are what they are. And this world is going to hold futility, emptiness, and there's nothing that you and I can do to change this. Ever since sin entered this world, that is the essence of the curse of sin. Life is frustrating. It can feel even downright meaningless at times. But with God, it's not, because with God, we can escape this life into eternal life in heaven when this life on this earth is done. And so he's saying, don't waste your life. Spend this life preparing for eternity, because the best life here as well, but especially looking toward beyond this life, the best life comes from listening to God, listening to his wisdom about life, about this world, about eternity, and following God. And so that's kind of that idea. Again, I wanted to mention that just because we hit that very quickly at the end of class last week. Now, 14 through 29 is of chapter 7 is this section that this brother calls balance. And again, I like that. I've seen other, titles, I guess, that I like as well. But looking at verses 14 through 18, you'll see kind of emphasis on our lack of control. We can't control life. That goes without saying, and yet how often do we live our lives and behave as if we could? Verses 19 through 22, he's going to show our weakness, our weaknesses, others' weaknesses as well. And then 23 through 29, he'll show our need for wisdom. And by the way, I submit to you, I was noticing this, and I think I brought it out maybe last week, that, is it New King James, I think? The value of practical wisdom is the title heading that they give to chapter 7, and it goes all the way through chapter 7. Oh, no, I remember. It was in my, I read my daily Bible reading last year was in the New King James, and in the New King James that I use for that, it has chapter 7, verse 1, this heading of something, I think it is the same, the value of practical wisdom, and it doesn't change headings until chapter 8, verse 2. And I was noticing that last week or the week before, just happened to notice that getting ready for class that particular Sunday, and I was like, well, that's kind of odd. But as you study it more, it makes more sense. That chapter 8, verse 1 almost seems clear to me that it goes more with that last section of chapter 7. It's not like it's damaging the text or anything if somebody says, well, I think it goes better with chapter 8, but it just, to me, it makes a lot more sense with that. And so we'll add that, we'll say verses 23 through 29 of chapter 7, verse 1 of chapter 8 as showing our need for wisdom. But here in verses 14 through 18, he'll show our lack of control. And you've got the text there on the screen in New King James and ESV, as I always do, so I want to, I'll read from, if I can get there, King James. So 14 through 18. In the day of prosperity be joyful, but in the day of adversity consider. God also hath set the one over against the other, so to the end that man should find nothing after him. All things have I seen in the days of my vanity. There is a just man that perisheth in his righteousness, and there is a wicked man that prolongeth his life in his wickedness. Be not righteous over much, neither make thyself over wise. Why shouldest thou destroy thyself? Be not over much wicked, neither be thou foolish. Why shouldest thou die before thy time? It is good that thou shouldest take hold of this, yea, also from this withdraw not thine hand, for he that feareth God shall come forth of them all. These are some verses that, maybe you've read before and you kind of go, huh? So he's showing our lack of control over life, essentially, we could say. God has made life, and you see this in verse 14, God has made life so that we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. We think we do sometimes. We make plans, and a lot of times, I don't know where I heard this or saw this recently, but I saw it may have been studying Solomon or Ecclesiastes notes. But I saw something recently where somebody was talking about the idea of making plans, and James' statement in James 4:13 and 14. Not what shall be on the morrow. What is your life? It is even a vapor that appears for a little time. And he says, he's talking to those who say, today or tomorrow we'll go into such a city, buy and sell and get gain. And he says, for that you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we shall live and do this or that. And there, wherever I was reading this or hearing this, and I'm thinking about it more, not because it matters so much as I'm trying to make sure I didn't hear it here and somebody teaching here or doing something here, so I'm not just repeating it, but I don't think it was. And the fellow, he made one point he made was that so often we focus on the, if the Lord wills, we'll go into that city, we'll do this, that, or the other, and nothing wrong with that. But he says, have you ever noticed that what he also says is, if the Lord wills, we shall live and do this or that or the other. Not only may I not carry out my plans tomorrow, there's no guarantee I'll even be here tomorrow. And, we're reminded of the rich fool who had all those crops, and he's going to tear down his barns and build bigger barns, and God says to him, thou fool, this night thy soul shall be required. Not only are you not going to be carrying out all these building projects that you've got, you're not even going to be carrying out breakfast tomorrow, because tonight, that's it. And that's a sobering thought in itself. But this brother was also pointing out that, making plans in accordance with, as far as if the Lord wills, it's more than just a phrase. And sometimes we get to repeating that phrase, and nothing wrong with that. And I think that's, if anything, it's a good thing. But my point is, sometimes if you ever talk to somebody, and I've even kind of felt this way before, maybe I'm sending a text to somebody, see you there, and I'm thinking to myself, maybe I should add, Lord willing. If the Lord wills, if God is willing. But it's more than just words that we say. It's never a bad thing to say it. I'm not criticizing that. I say it a lot. But it's a life. It's how we live our lives. Am I living life as if all my plans, I'm just going to carry them out as planned? Or do I live my life living by the statement, if God wills, if the Lord is willing? It may not be that I say that every single time I give some kind of a plan or something that I hope to do, something I hope to accomplish. But if I'm living my life that way, and so I thought that was an interesting point that he made, because, again, it's not a bad thing to say, we're going to do such and such. Well, Lord willing, we'll do that. But let's make sure that we live it, because we can be living that even though we may not say it every single plan we give. But is it not also true that somebody could say that every single thing that they say they're going to do, or every single plan they make? Well, if God wills, but they're not living their lives based on that. And so there's a consistency there. But here he's talking in back to Ecclesiastes 7, 14 through 18. We don't know. We don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. And so the idea here is seeming to be, in the good times of life, rejoice, enjoy it. But in those inevitable bad times, difficult times, well, consider and take heed and be warned by that. And be strengthened in that relationship with God. And so balancing, and we talk about this section as being balanced, balancing our thinking to help us learn to trust in God daily. We mentioned this, I feel like it was in this class not terribly long ago in relation to another verse, but it kind of reminds us of Jesus when he was teaching the disciples the model prayer. And he says, give us this day our daily bread. And some versions, I think, maybe even have it rendered something like, give us day by day our daily bread, or something like that. But that's the idea, is learning to trust in God for today. And you see this with manna. The children of Israel, they're out in the wilderness, and they need food. And so God gives them manna. But he tells them, just gather enough for one day. Of course, the exception to that was Friday. They gathered enough for the Sabbath because they were going to rest on the Sabbath. Every other day, just one day. And if they gathered more and tried to keep it overnight, it would breed worms, it would stink. And he says, you got to learn to trust in me day by day by day. So balancing our thinking, learning to trust in God daily. We often feel like we're in control. We often feel like we know what tomorrow is going to bring. And so sometimes that can cause us to fail to enjoy the now. And I was thinking about this, and boy, it's so much of this that we've been studying here lately. We've noticed the fella and his foolishness, hoarding of money, and kind of reminds us of Ebenezer Scrooge. But some of this just happened to fall right around the holidays, and it's just so applicable that I was thinking about this in terms of holiday gatherings and things like that. Maybe we've got family in for the holidays, or we're going to see them, and sometimes we assume that we're going to have so many of those opportunities, and so it may be something, and it might even be something very petty, very small, but I'm not going to take that. They're not going to talk to me like that. I'm going to tell them how it's going to be. But sometimes life is short, and we don't get those other opportunities that we assume are down the road where everything will be all peachy again, and we'll be. And it's not to say we shouldn't deal with, if there's some kind of wrongdoing or something that needs to be corrected. I'm not saying you just overlook sin or whatever, but is it not the case that sometimes we do that? And maybe sometimes I'm doing something else. It could be the holidays, or it could be some other situation where I could be spending time with somebody and I don't or maybe a chance to go visit somebody and I don't because, I'll do that. I'll do that tomorrow. I'll do that later. We just sort of assume that we're going to have that, and sometimes we do, but many times we don't. I've told Bremen folks before, at least some of I don't know how long it's been since I mentioned this. Some of the newer folks may not know it, but I've said, and I'm sticking to it. I will never delete this number from my address book in my phone. But it's a fellow from Dalton. Scott was his name, and we had met him door knocking. I think it was maybe door knocking for VBS or one of our gospel meetings. And there was some interest there, and we talked, and he was going through some difficulties in his life. I forget, I can't remember if it was marriage or something else. But we talked, and he was going to visit, and he said he was going to visit one particular, I think, Sunday, but he didn't. And then I called him, followed up. He says, "Oh yeah, I got there to the door. I saw people inside, and he says, I'm just part of what I'm dealing with. I get really, really anxious around people, and especially if there's a group of people. And I saw all the people in there, and he said I almost had like a panic attack, and so I just turned around and went home. And I said, well, I'm sorry to hear that, but hey, give me a shout if that's the case." We can find you a place that's kind of secluded where you can still hear or whatever. Well, then, I don't know, a week or two passes, and I intended to go and check on him or call him or visit him. And one day I'm having lunch with Brother Dale Puryear, who was one of the deacons, and he and I like to go visit sometimes on Sunday afternoons. And so they had us over, fed us, and he says, who are we going to visit today, Brother Chad? And I said, there's this fellow, Scott Beavers is his name, and I want to go. We met him door knocking, and he was going to come one time. He didn't, he ended up kind of getting panicky, didn't come in. And so I just kind of want to check on him. And he said, okay. So we eat, and then a little bit he says, he was in the living room. He says, what'd you say that guy's name was? Scott Beavers. Chad, he's in the obituaries. I said, do what? And he said, he brought the paper in there. And he opened it up and he said, is this the guy? And I said, I don't know. I said, I didn't know the Dalton area very well. I just went where somebody told me to go and door knock. At that time, we lived in Ringo. We drove over to Dalton. But I said, I'm afraid it is. And it said he died at home. He was not an old man at all. And so that concerned me. But we drove over there, and there was his sister, and she had some help and loading up a bunch of stuff, cleaning out the house. And she said, yes, my brother passed. She said, we don't really know if it was intentional or not, but he took just way too much of his medication, and he overdosed, and he died. And, man, I don't know what would have happened if I had another chance to follow up with him. He may not ever have sat down and studied. He may have studied and not obeyed the gospel. I don't know. But the point is, I'll never know. And I just assumed there would be other opportunities. I just assumed, well, maybe I was busy that previous Sunday or doing something else, and I just assumed that, well, Dale and I will go see him next Sunday. But we couldn't. And that's something that we just sometimes take it for granted. But we just don't know. Life is uncertain. And so in the good times, enjoy it. And, don't go to the other extreme. Again, there's balance here. We could go to one extreme and just almost be panicky in any good time and say, well, this could be it. And every time we have maybe it's Thanksgiving, Christmas, birthday, whatever, gathering, and, gather everybody around and say, hey, y'all, just want to say, this might be it. Well, you can get real depressing real quick if you go to that extreme. Well, that's not the idea, but it's just enjoy it, because we don't know. This could be it. We could probably go around, and most of us could tell stories similar to what I told, where you have those regrets. You thought you were going to see somebody again, but you didn't. But, we could probably go around, and a lot of us, maybe most of us, tell a story of somebody that you just assumed you were going to see again, but the last time you saw them, the last time you spoke, oh, it was good. We visited. We enjoyed that. We enjoyed that company. Think about Roger. Brother Roger Lane. And the last time I saw him, Scott Broughton and I went down. We'd been to a preacher's lunch. He was in the hospital there at Tanner. Had a little visit with him. He was pretty tired, I could tell. But he was same old Roger, and we had a good time. And he thanked us for coming to visit. Told him before we left, we loved him, and that was the last time I saw him. But that's a much better memory. So live in those moments with the understanding that we just don't know. We don't know what life holds. And knowing tomorrow may bring something difficult, sad, frustrating, it can help us to enjoy those times more, not to live in fear, but to just keep it in line with enjoying everything according to God's will, God's plan. And then verses 15 through 18, again, these are the verses that sometimes maybe make us scratch our head a little bit, and it's important to understand these verses in their context. Verse 15 says in the New King James, I've seen everything in my days of vanity. There's a just man who perishes in his righteousness, and there's a wicked man who prolongs life in his wickedness. And, do we ever see that? I mean, can you think of an example? I'm thinking biblically right now, but can you think of a Bible example of a just man who perished in his righteousness? I mean, Stephen, and of course, the most glaring example would be Jesus. I mean, not a sin. So, if I live a righteous life, I'm going to live to be a ripe old age, right? Not necessarily. Oh, well, so if I would if I just want to live a long life, so it sounds like I need to be wicked. Well, not necessarily. And of course, he'll talk about that as we go on. He'll balance that. You don't have control. So you see why we call this section showing our lack of control. But sometimes, the righteous man perishes even in his righteousness. And sometimes you see the wicked prolonged in their wickedness. Can you think of a Bible example of that? I just went blank on the king. There's an Old Testament king in the divided kingdom. I think it's in Judah, but I may be confusing another one. There's one that reigns like 55 years. And but I was thinking wicked king, and he did go wicked. I think I'm thinking of Uzziah. But he was righteous for a time. But the one that came to my mind immediately thinking about this was Abner. Not Abner. Joab. He killed Abner. Joab. And Joab was this mighty man, one of the mighty men of David, and he was, seems started off pretty good man. I mean, David chosen to be one of his mighty men, but you ever read about Joab and you're just kind of like, man, I don't want to be on this guy's bad side, because he was vicious and he was powerful, like politically powerful as well. And so you have the situation with Abner. It's in a battle, and Abner is telling Asahel, the brother of Joab, like, hey, stop pursuing me. I don't want to, how am I going to face your brother if I have to, kill you? He knows I can take him, essentially. But Asahel was very fleet of foot. He was fast. And Abner knows he can't outrun him. And so it's either you're going to have to stop pursuing me, son, or I'm going to turn around and fight you, and this ain't going to go well for you. So do yourself a favor and just lay off. Well, he wouldn't listen. So Abner ends up killing him. And all that's just to point out, this was in a battle. This was not murder, not manslaughter, anything like that. This was in a battle. But Joab then and his brother Abishai, when Abner defects to David, they catch him as he's leaving to go home. He's made this treaty agreement with David. They catch him and they're going to come and talk to him. And under guise of we're going to talk, they kill him. They murdered him. And it was for their brother, but their brother was killed in a battle. This was not. And David will say later, Joab, sorry, I keep saying the wrong name. David will say later to his son Solomon, pertaining to Joab, that he shed the blood of war in peace. And so you have that instance. Later on, after the rebellion of Absalom, you're going to have, I just went blank on that guy's name. What was the other guy's name that Joab killed? David was going to make him captain of the host in place of Joab. Anybody remember that guy's name? I've given it and read that 100 times. But anyway, same thing. Joab catches him off guard, not in a battle context, not like, hey, you and me, let's step outside kind of thing. Nothing like that. And he kills him. And man, Joab just lived and lived and lived. And finally, David, as he's giving charges to his son Solomon, tells him, hey, you need to deal with this. But that one, I don't know why, that one just is one that came to my mind when I thought about this statement here in verse, 15? Just lost my place. Abner was the one he killed the first time. There was another one. Amasa something. Yeah, it was after the rebellion of Absalom, and Amasa. I'm not sure exactly sure how to pronounce that, but yes, he was going to make him captain of the host, and Joab just kills him. It's just something else. That guy was he was vicious. But and there were times when he even would, get strong with David after the rebellion of Absalom, for instance, and he seems to have a point there, but boy, he was a murderous type individual. So the righteous people, they still die even in their righteousness. Wicked people may live long in spite of their wickedness, and that's the point here. And so verse 16, do not be overly righteous nor be overly wise, and that's the one where we kind of go, what? Don't be overly righteous? So Solomon's telling us just, hey, keep your righteousness in moderation. Just keep it a little bit. Don't go too, that's, you got to keep it in its context. And so it seems that he's dealing with motivation here. What's the motivation? In other words, don't think that just because you are living according to God's will, because you're living according to wisdom, righteousness, that's magically going to make you in control of your life. That's magically going to make your life long, prosperous, one or the other or both. Sometimes people are, oh, well, if righteousness prolongs life, well, then I'll live a righteous life. But why are you living righteously if that's the case? Is it because it's the right thing to do? Because you love God? Because you fear God and you respect Him and revere Him and want to follow Him? Or is it just because you want to live longer? And that can happen. Sometimes when I was a kid and maybe I'd get in trouble, I'm trying to get back in Mama's good graces, or maybe I might not even be in trouble. I may just have something I know I'm wanting to ask, and it's like a big thing, and I'm afraid, or maybe I know she's going to be inclined to say no to that. So I might really start, hey, Mom, just wanted you to know I got up this morning and loaded the dishwasher, cleaned the kitchen. Oh, I got the clothes up, put them in the washing machine. I did this, I did that, I vacuumed. And, Mom's like, oh, wow. I didn't do that because I just love you so much, Mom. I want to do something nice for you. I did it because I wanted something. And so that's what contextually, motivation. If I'm living right just to try to have control, just to try to live a longer life, that's the wrong reason. It's not done out of love, out of devotion to God. And if I'm just trying to control my life or extend my life, then you know what happens when things get difficult? I'll just quit. Man, I didn't sign up for this. When things get difficult, you'll just quit. And listen to me, things will get difficult. That's a fact of life. And so, am I serving God because it's the right thing to do? Or am I serving God because I think somehow that makes me feel more in control, that I'm going to get something out of this in the form of long life or a better life? And it is the best life, even in this side of eternity, here in this life. Don't get me wrong. But it seems here he's talking about motivation. What is your motivation? Because if it's just for reward, if it's just for some other reason, then when times get difficult, we're going to struggle. We're going to quit. And you look at Job. Job 2, verse 9, mentioned it, a few weeks ago in a sermon. I mean, here's Job, and he's suffering. Job's a good man. Job's a righteous man. God said so. But he's suffering. And at the end of chapter 1, you have Job, and he makes a statement. What does he say? Naked came I forth from my mother's womb, naked shall I return. Now, he had his theology wrong. He says, the Lord giveth, and the Lord hath taken away. He thought God had taken away from him. He was mistaken on that. It was Satan. But what does he say after that? The Lord gave, the Lord has taken away. What? Blessed be the name of the Lord. And in all this, Job sinned not, nor charged God foolishly. But you get to chapter 2, verse 9, and Mrs. Job, what does she say? I mean, you still retain your integrity? Look at you, Job. And you can almost hear, to paraphrase here, and it's speculation, but you can almost hear this, her saying something to the effect of, look at you. What good is it doing you to serve God? You just sit there and retain your integrity and talk about blessed be the name of the Lord? Why? Look at your condition. What's God doing for you? Do you catch that transactional language? What's God doing for you? And Job understood. Job wasn't perfect. And he's even going to have a stern conversation with God at the end of the book. But Job got it. Righteousness, living right, following God is not about a transaction. It's about just simply who God is. But here you have her, and she says, you retain your integrity? Just curse God and die. Be done with it, Job. And he says, that is so foolish, stupid advice. What's our motivation for following God, doing what's right? Again, remember Jesus, he was perfect, but he died young. Didn't even live to see 35. Righteous living doesn't magically put us in control. Living this way, it's a good way, as he says, verse 16, why shouldest thou destroy thyself? When you live this way, it's like transactionally with God, like, well, God, I'll serve you if you give me a long life, if you give me a blessed life, if you give me all the good things of life, I'll serve you then. It's a good way to destroy thyself, to quote the King James there. Because you're setting yourself up for failure. When things go wrong, and they will. When bad things happen, and they will. It's going to shake your faith. But if I serve God just because it's the right thing to do. And then verse 17, he's saying excessive wickedness, that's not the answer either. That doesn't give you any more control than righteous living. In fact, that just increases the likelihood that you should die before thy time there at the end of verse 17. You live wicked, somebody might say, okay, well, I mean, so righteous living doesn't guarantee a long life? Well, hey, in that case, might as well just do things my way. And just grab all the gusto I can in this life. And it'll be longer, and I'll just enjoy that. Well, not so fast. He says, you start living like a fool, fast and loose and all that, you're just increasing the likelihood you're going to die before your time. If anything, you're now there are some wicked people that live longer, sure, but you're at least increasing the chances of ending that life much sooner. And so verse 18, he's essentially saying, grasp this, is the way the King James, or take hold of this. From this withdraw not thine hand, for he that feareth God shall come forth of them all. So here's kind of wrapping up this little section. He says, fearing God keeps us from either of these extremes. Of the extreme of I'm going to serve God just because I want to get something transactionally from it. But from the other extreme of I'm not going to serve God because I don't get anything from it. He says, avoid either extreme. Keep these warnings in mind. You're not going to have control over life. That's, again, this 14 through 18, showing our lack of control. The right reason, the true reason to live a godly life is out of love for God, for who he is, because it's the right thing to do, period. And that's one of the major lessons we learn from the book of Job, by the way. And then 19 through 22 here, he's going to show our weakness. Wisdom strengtheneth the wise more than 10 mighty men which are in the city, for there is not a just man upon earth that doeth good and sinneth not. Also take no heed unto all words that are spoken, lest thou hear thy servant curse thee, for oftentimes also thine own heart knoweth that thou thyself likewise hast cursed others. This is interesting because in verse 19 there, wisdom strengthens the wise more than 10 rulers of the city. We tend to believe human strength is the answer, right? But he's saying here wisdom is stronger than physical strength. And we've seen illustrations of that all throughout. I grew up watching a show that illustrated that. Y'all remember MacGyver? MacGyver always, he didn't go in there. He wasn't going to have a fist fight with them or all the martial arts or anything like that, but he would outthink them. And so the wisdom there, we see that sometimes in television and shows and movies and things. But verse 20, this is interesting. He says it's a statement that's made throughout Scripture. There's not a person on earth who's always good, never sins, never does wrong. So we all need God, in other words, mercy, forgiveness, grace, help, wisdom. But in verses 21 and 22, this is building on that. He says, don't take to heart everything you hear others say. Because listen, you are, and most everybody in this class is adults, and even if you're into adolescence, you're going to hear, and no doubt have heard, somebody say something bad about you. Don't take to heart something bad that you hear about you from others. Don't let that get you all bent out of shape. If nothing else, he says, but for the fact that you've done that too. You've done that before. He's not saying it's okay. This brother from Florida says, don't get all bent out of shape, into friendship, quit the church because you heard somebody say something bad about you. Sometimes we just need to let it go. Sometimes we just need to let something go. Words have been said in marriage that we just need to let it go. And I know that's easier said than done, but I also know it's true. There are words that are said in our marriages. We need to let it go. There are words that are said by a family member. We just need to let it go. Maybe there are words that have been said at work. We just need to let it go. Sometimes we don't want to do that. Deal with sin, yes. Again, I'm not saying ignore or overlook sin. Deal with sin. But then let it go because you're weak too. I'm weak too. We all have our weaknesses. And God's reminding us here, we're all a work in progress. But for some reason, and I was thinking about this, studying this section, I've been there. We hear somebody say something about us, and sometimes we're just like, what? I cannot believe that. Somebody behind my back saying that about me. And I'm like, I've done that before. And I don't say that, again, that is not to justify it. It's just as wrong, whichever side it's on. But we've been there, haven't we? But when I hear them talking about me, that is like, are you serious? And I need to do something about that. Somebody needs to do something about that. And it's easy to forget that I'm weak too, and I've fallen into that trap before. And I've said something about somebody else. So he says, remember, we're all a work in progress. Stop pretending about ourselves and others, because we all have individually and even collectively weaknesses. And so remember that. Don't be so, there's two sides of this. I kind of hesitate to say this, but I want to give a qualifier here, a disclaimer. Don't be so shocked when you find out a family member, a coworker, a brother in the church has sinned, has fallen. Sometimes we find that out and we're just like, oh, I just can't believe it. It's almost like I'm about to lose my faith or something. Don't be so shocked. Do be shocked, because sin is sin and it's damnable. It will cause a soul to be lost for all eternity, a soul that Jesus died for. But don't be shocked in the sense of that could happen to anybody, because I'm weak too and I have sinned. And I may look at somebody else and go, I cannot believe he did that, but what about me? What have I done? We've all been there. And sometimes we get so just, he says, don't forget our own weaknesses. We're tempted to act like we have the high ground. We never sin, but we all need forgiveness. Balance this with not overlooking sin, but realize we all need a Savior. And that is understanding, recognizing our weakness. All right, let's stop there. We're out of time. And pick up verse 23 through 29 or through 8:1 next week. Thank y'all.